Hello, my name's Rob Rado, and I would like to welcome you to this Talking Talent webinar for Asia Wellbeing Week, entitled Wellbeing and Resilience for Sustainable Performance. It was the Belgian philosopher Pascal Chabot who called stress and burnout civilization's disease, and it's certainly symptomatic of our modern age. And it's for that reason that we have created this webinar to consider the topic of well-being and resilience for sustainable performance, drawn from our experience as coaches in this particular space. And I'm going to spend the next 40 to 45 minutes taking you through our thoughts, some structure and a framework, as well as talking about the drivers for this as a particular topic, in the hope that it will help you in your own particular curiosity about this particular subject. So the intent behind the session really is to give you some stimulus and some things to think about on this very important topic, and one that we find comes up time and time again in our work with clients on a global scale. So what we're going to cover over the course of the next period of time is a little bit around well-being and sustainable performance in context, what we believe is the case for action. I'll give you something in terms of how we would define stress, how stress is defined, what it looks like, how well-being is defined, and the things to look out for, those well-being triggers that are worthy of us all being better equipped to spot and to manage in the moment. And at the end of the session, I'm going to give you a framework with which to consider your own well-being and a language that attaches to it that we find particularly helpful in the coaching space in starting to really focus in on the core issues and to develop strategies for change in order that individuals that we work with can bring their best selves to work and be their best selves at home. Now, I'll start just by introducing who Talking Talent are, just to place us in context. So Talking Talent is a niche, award-winning global coaching consultancy, and we're leading many of our clients and organizations in the gender diversity agenda. We work with our clients to unlock the potential within their business and to make company-wide behavior shifts that accelerate business performance. So for more than a decade now, we've been working with organizations on very tailored coaching programs that enable them and help them to retain talented individuals, increase their effectiveness, and to ensure that the benefit that comes from these programs ripples throughout its business. In that last 10-year period, we've coached somewhere in the region of 19,000 women, working parents, and line managers, helping our clients save large sums of money in retention fees alone. We work with coaches on a global scale. We have offices in New York, in Hong Kong, and an administrative base in the UK. And you can just see some of the client names on the slide in front of you that we have worked with over that period of time. And it continues to be a topic that is growing. I am one of the coaching directors at Talking Talent. I am also the practice lead for Wellbeing. Alongside our work coaching working parents and line managers, we have a very thriving Wellbeing coaching practice which continues to generate interest and activity from a lot of our new and existing clients as well. So let's start by placing this particular topic in some kind of context. So sustainable performance and well-being, we absolutely believe and have seen over a number of years now that this really is a strategic business issue. Individuals are absolutely experiencing more strain in always-on environments, whether that's through high-intensity change projects, whether that's organizational change, environmental change. There's lots of things that point to this as something which is no longer just a nice thing to do in organizations. And the numbers support it. The data is there for all to see. A huge figure, the World Bank estimating nearly $1 trillion of economic burden for work-related mental illness. That's the global cost. The scary stat that by 2020, the World Health Organization is suggesting that depression will have reached epidemic proportions. And we can see this is coming through from a regulatory point of view. There are many more examples on a global scale where regulators are seeking to impose responsibilities on organizational structures for culture, and in the process of doing so, needing to place well-being at the heart of organizational culture, as it is such a key driver for sustainable performance. Organizational life now requires individuals to show up in a very different way, to be resilient in a way that they weren't before, and to be able to sustain the performance that organizations need for far longer. So we believe, as coaches, there has never been a time in which organizations and individuals need to develop this skill of self-renewal, of self-resourcing. I don't necessarily believe that organizations can fix someone's well-being, but I absolutely believe organizations can create the conditions in which individuals are better able to look after themselves. And there's additional context to this. There's cultural, there's geographic context. You know, we know that the well-being environment in Southeast Asia plays very much into this particular space, with pressures and triggers associated with things like high costs of living, placing additional strain and pressure on people. Longer working hours, much higher than the global average. The requirement to be seen to be at work, to work later, to be on call. The idea of this 24/7 connectivity and the recognition of the need to interact with other time zones, that's absolutely seen to be the norm. Many roles, many organizations require extensive travel for people to be undertaking in the course of their roles. And that places an additional level of strain. Our sleeping habits are not great, much talked of in terms of an inability to get a proper good night's sleep, not helped by the propensity to not have these fire breaks between technology and sleep. It's really important that we're better at how we manage some of these fundamentals. Presenteeism still seems to be a problem and a challenge in certain industries and certain sectors. The essence, if you are in an environment which is a low-trust environment, whereby managers will look at individuals and think, if I can't see you, then clearly you're not working. Not helpful. There is a great deal of competition experienced from a very young age. Individuals are expected to perform, to be perfect, to reach positions, to achieve, to attain success. And that pressure to succeed can often distort and produce complex problems that result in stress and pressure and burnout. And that definition of success can be very narrow. The ability to step outside of that is limited. We also know from an Asian perspective, there still is some stigma attached to mental health challenges, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. And there are indeed much more limited access to mental health facilities and support when these situations do occur. So the cultural triggers that can make well-being such an important topic in this part of the world cannot be ignored. Now, building on that challenge around mental health is very much a sense of a be-strong culture. That requirement to be able to endure seems to come through loud and clear. And the statistic quoted, the Hong Kong Mental Morbidity Survey, estimating that 1 in 7 are living with some kind of a mood disorder, such as anxiety or depression, and yet only 26% of those affected feel able to seek professional and appropriate levels of professional support. And that stigma is not helpful in terms of individuals being able to make progress in this regard. And the feedback from the study that's quoted from the Singapore National Mental Health Literacy Study, that was an extensive study in itself, showed that people with mental health issues were viewed very negatively. The sense that individuals with mental health issues could get better if they wanted to, that mental health issue was some kind of a sign of personal weakness, and that even in the worst case scenarios, people suffering from mental health issues were deemed to be unpredictable or indeed dangerous. So that cultural nuance adds an additional lens of priority for the need for individuals to be better at managing their own well-being and organizations to be cognizant of that fact. Now, as coaches, we see this show up often in our interactions with clients, whether that's in group coaching environments or whether that's in one-to-one coaching engagements. And some of these triggers are listed on the slide in front of you. The fact that roles are getting bigger, people are required to do more with less, adds a layer of pressure. The fact that we can always reach for a smartphone somewhere and be in contact, that 24/7 connectivity brings huge benefits to the business world, but it also puts pressure on us to be far better at managing boundaries. The fact that we know we can connect and we can do work doesn't necessarily help us if we can't be disciplined enough to know when to stop. And if we don't stop, then there are far high levels of elevated strain, pressure and anxiety experienced by workers, which in itself produces conflict with other roles in our lives. And we all have many roles that we play: the professional, the parent, the brother, the partner, lots of things that we need to juggle. And if our experience at work and home is pressured, then there's damage seen in the other roles in life. And we make personal sacrifices. We choose to work as opposed to self-renew. That last email comes in at the end of the day and we choose to attend to that rather than getting away and maybe getting some exercise or spending time with our family. We make the sacrifice because we are trying to be strong and endure. We've seen also an increase, particularly in senior coachees, of reaching a level of attainment in roles and then feeling as though they're a little empty, that there's more to life than this, almost achieving the climb to that peak. And the first thing they do is look for another peak to climb, as if there's got to be more than this. And this plays out in the way that individuals neglect their own needs. And in the worst case scenarios, we're seeing absolutely an increase in clients turning up with symptoms of burnout, exhaustion, driven by the increased complexity of the environments in which they live and they work. Now, we survey our clients, we do periodic pieces of independent research into this topic, and we keep coming back with seeing that the role of leaders is really important in how this is managed. Leadership is critical. The numbers are in front of you. 57% of our coaches want greater managerial support, 58% wanted greater flexibility to their working approaches, and 50% see coaching as critical to career progression. Now, that's not necessarily coaching with independent coaches like myself, but it's mainly just having people around them in organizations that can help them, not necessarily direct, but support them to find their own answers. Sadly, over a third of coaches still say that their line manager's behavior has impeded their progression and impacted their well-being. Not a great place to be. So it emphasizes the importance that leaders at all levels within organizations can play in creating those conditions where people are better able to manage themselves and their own well-being. Now, the business case for change on this is huge. There are lots of studies that point to the benefits for employers who invest broadly in the topic of employee well-being, whether that's in better performance. You know, we know that organizations with high levels of employee well-being do outperform the stock market. Companies demonstrating best practice in employee health and well-being show much higher than average shareholder returns. And reduced staff turnover, the amount of money that's invested in sickness absence is significantly lower in some instances. The average staff turnover rate in Hong Kong that shows there was 12.3%. That's a big number. And the associated costs of replacing those individuals, providing cover, are really high. So from a purely commercial perspective, for organizations to be better at this stuff and create conditions is very high. Reducing sickness absence, dealing with presenteeism. I mean, the Singapore productivity loss due to sickness absence is rumoured to be close to hitting 3.3 billion Singapore dollars by 2030. A big number and clearly a cause for organisations to pay attention to it. And there are peripheral benefits. You know, organisations that promote health and well-being are able to show up as more creative, more innovative. So again, getting this stuff right, focusing on it, not necessarily seeing it as a nice thing to do, has some huge, hard benefits to organisations. And in the continuing war for talent, I've certainly got plenty of coachees that I work with who are actively targeting organisations to move to, who are good at this stuff, who take well-being seriously and encourage their employees to better look after themselves, either directly or just through the way in which they are managed. So we believe it's absolutely time to view well-being as an essential people capability. It's not just something on the side. We have always wanted workers, leaders, any employees to develop skills in things like management, team management, people leadership, to be emotionally intelligent, to be able to influence and manage positive stakeholder relationships, to be strategic, to be innovative, to be creative. But we also think that individuals need to be capable of developing well-being, self-care, other care, looking after themselves and creating that environment in which individuals can be their best selves. So the goal, as the slide says, is to create champions of well-being change across organisations. There are many initiatives run to promote and support well-being. I think the most powerful that I've seen in organisations is where everybody models this stuff. There's no corporate communication or initiative that influences change better than people showing up and behaving differently. So making well-being an actual capability to be worked on has huge value to organisations, the length and breadth of the globe. So let's just take a step back and bring some focus into what we mean by this, what we mean by stress and by well-being and burnout, and those terms that get bandied about a lot at the moment in organisational life. So one of the many definitions of stress that's out there is this one. Stress is the over-arousal of emotion. Every time we're feeling a negative emotion of one kind or another in an overdone way. Now, as the slide says, individual responses can vary depending on past experience, personality, and protective factors. We all show up differently. We have a different tolerance to stress. We have different means by which we cope. But one thing that is generally seen to be true is that a good proportion, 99% of stress, is often generated internally by the beliefs that we hold about situations. Now, some of that's a hangover from the days when our prehistoric brains were permanently wired for stress detection, for risk detection, to keep ourselves alive. Now, in the modern era, thankfully, more often than not, we are rarely deemed to be physically at risk, and yet we've replaced that physical risk fear with a more internalized thought process. So stress can be generated simply by a thought. We can find ourselves in a stress state. Our brains can trigger the release of the two primary stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, and these can be triggered simply by a thought, not by very often a real risk of damage to ourselves. So our environments become more stressful, triggered predominantly by our thinking and the beliefs that we hold. Now, resilience, which is arguably the way in which we are able to counterbalance stress by being more resilient. And resilience isn't about being tough. It's not about being hardened particularly, but it is, as the slide shows, about our ability to return to original form, to spring back after challenge. Resilience is about facing into challenge, obstacle, difficult situations, and being able to endure, go through them and learn from the experience, our ability to adapt successfully in the face of stress and adversity and not remain bent out of shape by the challenges that are placed upon us by our home lives, by our working lives. I love the phrase that's used in this particular slide, this idea of post-traumatic growth. I quite like that. It's quite dramatic, but it does show that we can have difficult stuff happen to us, we can have challenge at work, we can have pressure, and we can grow from the experience. And the good thing is you can learn to be resilient. Resilience isn't something we're just born with. We can develop skill, we can be better functioning, and we can be better the next time we face into challenge. So resilience is that counterbalance, ability to reform and reshape ourselves through challenge or adversity. Now, some of the things to be aware of, these are the kind of symptoms, and symptoms of stress can be physical, they can be psychological, and they vary from person to person, but there's some common things that arise in terms of the physical symptoms of stress. Things like weekend headaches. People hold themselves very tightly over the course of the working week, and then come the weekend when they can switch down, dial down a little bit. That's when the body leaks, the body lets that stress out, and it comes through in the way of headaches, perhaps. Digestive complaints is a real sign of physical stress. increased blood pressure tends to be the more typical one in terms of how stress shows up. General levels of fatigue, that sense of just having nothing left in terms of energy, is a sign of stress, as is worse than usual allergies, itchy skin, the types of things that really start to irritate and annoy us. If we're finding that, again, it's our body giving us a message that our heads sometimes don't want to listen to. Surprisingly, things like having a sweet tooth can be a sign of stress. Achy mouth, teeth grinding. Individuals often report, or their partners report, of hearing them in the night just grinding their teeth. A real sign, a physical sign of stress. And then things like out-of-nowhere acne, skin complaints, skin conditions that can arise. Again, it's almost as if the body can't hold that stress, so it leaks through physical symptoms of stress. So if those are the physical symptoms, there's also the psychological symptoms. And that can vary from things like tension in relationships, real challenges, people who show up and can't manage some of that tension, almost create it. Depersonalization, and this is a really tricky one. This is where individuals sometimes show up appearing to, out of nowhere, lack feeling, become cynical, isolate themselves, lose empathy. These are psychological symptoms of individuals buckling under the strain and pressure of life and work. And that in turn can lead to a loss of confidence, increased anxiousness and insecurity, a sense that I just can't do this anymore, a loss of faith in one's own efficacy to actually achieve at home or at work. And that can translate into overwhelm, this inability to focus. I've got so much to do, it's too big, I can't focus on any one thing. Very tricky to be able to manage. In some instances, people report losing memory, forgetting stuff that ordinarily they would easily be able to access. The circuits are just overwhelmed. Now, interestingly, boredom can also be a sign of stress, in the same way as that over-arousal can produce very tricky symptoms and side effects. Boredom equally is often a sign of stress if people are not getting the right kind of stress. And at the more extreme end, an absolute rise in depression, in clinical depression, as an illness that requires treatment. So stress manifests itself both physically, it manifests itself psychologically. Either way, these are things that require looking at and spotting. In organizational contexts, managers are not necessarily expected to be experts in this topic, but they are expected to be curious and to notice when people show up as different, when some of these triggers seem to have been set off and individuals start displaying symptoms. That's the time to notice them, to be curious about them, and to seek engagement with the individuals to help them to better manage themselves. Now, it's also worth bearing in mind that there's a gender lens on this. So men and women manage stress differently, but they also place a different level of importance on doing so. So men seem to be less concerned about managing stress and seem to suggest they're doing enough in terms of stress management, whereas women might place more emphasis on the need to do so, but quite often feel they're not being good enough at how they do it. So men and women do exhibit the common signs of stress, but they might do so in a different order. For example, the Maslach inventory, which looks at measuring stress and was originally developed as a tool to look at stress management in education and health sectors, that showed interestingly that the order in which men and women go through burnout varies. Women tend to go to a place of emotional and physical fatigue first, then they start to lose confidence in themselves, and only at the last stage of extreme burnout and stress do they start to lose empathy, become cynical, and check out, effectively. Whereas men, it's the other way around. Men can sometimes show up as a first stage of burnout, as cynical, losing empathy, loss of engagement with colleagues at work, just appearing to not be there. Men then go to a stage where they become emotionally and physically exhausted, and only at the last stage the men perhaps lose great deals of confidence in their ability to get stuff done. So the reason for mentioning that is it's easy to paint a broad brush over this, but there are nuances in terms of how the genders experience stress and burnout. So it's useful just to be aware of. And there is clearly a link between stress and performance, and this is an interesting one just to bear in mind that, of course, there is an optimal balance point here. We all need a bit of stress, good stress. as opposed to distress. And it can tip quite easily from an optimal balance of stress into a stage where someone's heading towards burnout. And burnout in this regard is defined as physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion caused by long-term involvement in emotionally demanding situations. It's right at the extreme end of stress management. And there are differences between stress and burnout. And stress is bad, burnout's even worse. Stress manifests in terms of nervousness, feeling of urgency, being a little overreactive. Burnout, on the other hand, goes to lack of emotion, detachment, loss of interest, hopelessness, helplessness, loss of motivation, and then full-on depression. And organisations need to be aware of and have contingency for support and help for individuals who are on that slope. Talking Talent as an organisation commissioned periodic pieces of independent research. We did a really interesting study back in 2017 on the topic of burnout. And whilst this was a study that was focused mainly within the UK, its findings, I think, have relevance elsewhere as well. What we found was that more than half of the workers that were surveyed felt worn out by the type of work and the environment in which they work. 2/3 of those working parents felt this way. A big number. Working parents were deemed to be significantly at risk, as was senior management, that sticky middle layer of management within organisations who were needing to take the pressure from on high, pass it down, anticipate and manage the people around them. Somewhat surprisingly, a lot was spoken about in terms of graduates feeling worn out at the very beginnings of their career. And this is a really challenging one because we really want graduates into organisations to learn the skill of self-renewal, self-compassion, self-resourcing in order that they can sustain their performance over the lifetime of their careers. If graduates are feeling worn out too soon to their careers and burnout results, we lose valuable resource. We lose that next generation into organisations. And interestingly also for graduates, they were the least likely population to seek help, often citing concerns as to how that might reflect on them in terms of their future career prospects at a very early stage in their career. So again, I think there's an educative thing that would be really helpful here for organisations to be better at helping new graduate populations manage themselves, support themselves through the inevitable stresses and strains of plotting a career. Now, there's a continuum along which all this works. The consequences of stress become burnout, become depression, become anxiety. And we would prefer to work right at the far left-hand end and enable individuals to manage themselves better as they go and not wait for sort of boom and bust to happen. And some of that relates to the organisational challenges that organisations face into, this idea of it beginning with an employee struggling and yet not being able to seek help, not wanting to, and becoming, as it says there, the shadow of their former self. Managers in turn, without knowledge, without education, misdiagnosed, think it's poor performance, treated as such. The individual may then go off on sick leave. It becomes a real challenge, and the impact on both the employer, the employee is huge. The employer struggles, can't recruit, can't replace. The individual underperforms, shoulders extra work, and all of that triggers into a downward cycle. It's not talked about, it's not confronted. It's a hidden challenge for organisations, but a big one, a really big one. So we believe, as I said, that well-being really is a critical capability going forward, and one that organisations need to grasp. Now, when we talk about well-being, and there are as many definitions of well-being as there are stars in the sky, it is more than an absence of ill health. And this isn't just about ill health. This is about how individuals show up. There are people who I know who have real health challenges and yet show up with a real great sense of well-being. Equally, there are those that seem to have everything sorted and yet show up, perform, appear to be not well in that regard. Now, well-being is very subjective. You can't separate the professional from the personal. It's that holistic view on what well-being is. And the idea really is to recognise what our own set range is for well-being and to work within that, because it's a truly multi-dimensional thing. Your well-being is different to my well-being, is different to the person next to them. And how we understand that and how we work within our own set range is what makes the difference. And the definition we like for well-being is this idea of a balancing act between someone's social, emotional, psychological, physical, or spiritual assets, the resources they have available to them, married directly against the same social, emotional, psychological, physical liabilities, the challenges that they're facing, both at work or at home. And very simply, when we have more challenges than resources, we become out of balance. And the trick here is not to permanently try and create this level, nice, beautifully calm seesaw, but it is to know when our well-being is being eroded as to what we need to do to bring ourselves back into balance again. And that's what life is. Dealing with the challenges, rebalancing. Dealing with more challenges, rebalancing. So well-being is about the art of being able to do that. And we believe that well-being should be a capability. We work with an amazing organisation from Australia, occupational psychologists, who developed the framework that we use, and they have defined a well-being capability, and they describe it as making purposeful, well-informed choices to optimise well-being for self and others, role modelling well-being as a priority, embedding reliable disciplines, and influencing positive change in the system for others. And it begins with self-care, how you look after yourself, and then reads across from an organisational context into the team, other care, how I manage myself, how I manage others, how I look after myself, how I look after others. And diving a little bit deeper, what that means in terms of actions for individuals to take. People who have a good well-being capability, who are able to understand the importance of self-care, they do prioritise their own well-being. They know it's an important driver of sustainable performance. They know that by being well, they are more likely to deliver for themselves, for the firm, for their families. People with good well-being capability know what they need to energise, sustain, and look after themselves in work and out of work. And they are disciplined. They know what they need to do, and they do it. And they can embed positive well-being behaviours, and they do things like make sure they have enough breaks between meetings, they limit their working hours, they know what they need in order to replenish, they exercise, they eat well, they are able to decompress and disconnect between work and home. They have that discipline. It takes practice, but it's eminently doable. That's what the self-care part was. And then translating that into the team level, teams who have good well-being talk about the link between well-being and performance. They make it a topic for conversation. They buddy up. They support one another. They are inclusive teams. They share ideas. They share concerns. They share challenges. They can have positive conflict if it moves things forward. And most importantly, and Google are piloting and driving lots of work in this space, creating what's known as psychological safety. So there's no stigma attached to anyone having well-being issues or mental health issues. Teams that focus on this stuff well will give and receive feedback on performance. They show recognition and appreciation to one another. They have a high trust environment, both personally and professionally. And they have fun. Teams that focus on well-being and have good well-being have fun. Some of this sounds so obvious, and yet under pressure in the kind of white-hot heat of working life, sometimes this stuff just gets put to one side, and it shouldn't. It's really important. Now I'm going to introduce you to a framework that we use in the coaching space. We use in conversation, we use in group settings. I've certainly found it to be an incredible door opener for really rich conversations around helping individuals to better manage their well-being, to identify what are the bits that need their focus, their energy, and their attention. And I would invite all of you dialing into this particular webinar to listen to this and think about what you might need to do and the areas that speak to you as requiring focus, but you would benefit from spending some time and effort developing strategies to support yourself with. Now, the framework is based on the Global Leadership Wellbeing Survey, which is a wellbeing diagnostic tool developed by our partners in Australia, eConsents, and Talking Talent pioneering the use of GLWS in the UK. And we use it with individuals, we use it with groups, we use it in a variety of different settings. What's consistent is the use of the language, and I will explain that. So the survey, the framework, operates on two very distinct axes. The first being how we work well. So there's elements of well-being that are directly impacted by who we are at work, our professional selves. So our well-being environment in the workplace, working well. And with equal weighting, we then look also at how we live well. So those same aspects of well-being, but how they affect us and impact us at home. Our home life, our social life, our personal lives. The things that really matter to us outside the workspace. And they have equal weighting, because you can't separate the two. So two axes upon which this operates. And then there are 6 dimensions of well-being. Now, these are listed on the slide in front of you, not in order of importance. They all have equal weighting. But at different points in our life, because of the subjective nature of well-being, we might find one is causing us some challenges, or 2 might be causing us some challenges. But the idea is that we focus our efforts and our energies on all 6. And they begin with this idea of authentic relationships. What's the quality of the relationships that we have in the workplace, the quality of the relationships we have with family and friends and the community outside of our working environment? And we know that when relationships are not in a great place, our well-being takes a significant dip. We're not in a good place. So authentic relationships is an important part of how we manage our well-being. But think about that for your own purposes. What are the quality of your authentic relationships in work, out of work? The second element is known as meaning, purpose, and direction. So am I leading a good and a full life as I would describe it, not as anybody else would? Am I getting from my life that which is important to me? Does my work have meaning? Do I have purpose in what I do? Am I following a direction? Does my life equally have some element of pattern and path to it? And if it doesn't, again, well-being takes a real dip. So what do I need to do to get in touch with what's important to me and what I'm doing? The purpose, the direction that I'm following. Really important, particularly for those in management and leadership positions in organizations. So the third dimension is this idea of resilience and equanimity. And we've talked about what resilience is. But it's married with this word equanimity. And that's the ability to manage challenge and change, but to emotionally self-regulate while I do it, not to be all over the place, but to have a level of emotional evenness, to have some pragmatism, to have some perspective, to be able to manage myself in a way that my emotions are not in charge of me. And in the process of doing so, I can deal with the challenge, I can deal with change, I can deal with the obstacles that are inevitably placed on us simply in the act of living. So what's my resilience like at work? What's my resilience like at home? And for working parents with whom we work a lot, it's that challenge of being the working parent, being the mum at home, being the dad at home, being the professional at work, and the resilience to be able to manage the two. It's a really big one, resilience and equanimity. The fourth dimension, vitality and energy, arguably the real foundation stones for how someone builds great well-being. And perhaps an easier one sometimes for organizations to access, whether that's promoting healthy eating or exercise. But it's still really important. But it is only one of the 6 that are listed down here. How good are you at managing how you look after your body? What exercise routines work for you? What's the quality of your sleep? Again, back to the challenges of technology. What do you need to do to change your relationship with technology to enable you to get better levels of rest and recuperation? So vitality and energy is a biggie as well. And then balance and boundaries. And balance and boundaries is essentially how good at juggling are you? We all have stakeholders that have a stake in us, that want something from us. How are we managing the competing demands that get placed on us in all of the areas of our life, from our work life to our home life? How good are you at holding your boundaries? How disciplined are you? What do you do if a boundary gets violated? How do you deal with that? And what might you need to do to redress the balance sometimes, to say no to things? How good are you in that regard? Can you tolerate the occasional drop ball from that juggle? And then the last dimension of well-being is that which is known as intellectual engagement and flow. So this is, are we getting some good stretch? Are we getting developed? Are we getting stretched? Are we getting the opportunity to bring our best selves into the work that we do? Are we in flow with the work that we are doing? Are we achieving our potential? Now this, more often than not, shows up primarily in the workplace, where we spend the vast chunks of our time. Less so outside of work, which is why there's no icon on the slide in front of you. But intellectual engagement and flow is another really important part, and I think has a good, clear connection back into meaning, purpose, and direction. A lot of these dimensions interlink with one another. But on a given day, at a given period of time, there'll be one or two of these dimensions that we could do with spending some time thinking about and developing strategies to improve, to avoid some of those trigger points, to recognize the pressures that are placed upon us, and to prioritize our well-being in a way that's going to work for us. Now, this has been a very short webinar in which we've touched on some of the headlines, some of the major challenges, and some of the ways in which we can bring some focus to well-being as a topic. I think there's much more that organizations can do. I think there's more that individuals can do to really take some ownership to this as a topic. And I truly believe in the knowledge economy going forward, how we address this, how we start to build this in to every aspect of our working lives and our home lives, whether that's through performance management initiatives, whether that's through objective setting, whether that's through cultural priorities within organizations, to make this something that's owned from within. I say again, I don't think organizations can fix your well-being, but they can absolutely encourage you to take responsibility to look after yourselves better. And as coaches, it's a hugely fascinating and rewarding area in which to work, because I think there's so much scope for people to be better able to look after themselves. So, as I said, a short period of time to talk about a very big topic. Thank you for your time, for your attention on this particular topic, and if you are interested in learning more and delving into this in greater detail, then do please feel free to reach out to Talking Talent. We'll be delighted to help in any way that we can on what we believe to be a truly important and indeed critical capability for individuals to develop going forward. So be well, thank you for your time, and maybe we will cross paths again at some point in the future. But many thanks.